in her hometown of San Salvador in El Salvador. Silvia and her older sister happened to be home on a weekday morning because they were studying for midterm exams. They were in the living room, practicing math problems on a blackboard, when the doorbell rang. Her grandmother opened the door to reveal two nicely dressed young men wearing name tags.
And our grandmother asked him to come in, and they sat down and started talking. So for the first two visits, we didn't even know who they were, what religion it was, really. We didn't bother to read in the pamphlet in the back that it said the Church of Jesus Christ. We still didn't know until about the third visit, when they talked about the restoration in the Book of Mormon.
This is Saints Volume 4, the podcast. I'm James Perry.
And I'm Lisa Christensen.
A lifelong ministry, Silvia Allred.
At first, Silvia's grandmother, aunt, and mother joined in on the discussions as missionaries returned week after week. Quickly, it became just Silvia, her sister, and her aunt. And then, it was just Silvia and her sister. But they loved hearing from the missionaries. After a few visits, the missionaries told them about the Book of Mormon. In those days, copies of the Book of Mormon were not free for investigators. So Silvia and her sister pooled their money and bought one for $1.
My sister and I were so excited about the book and wanted to read it really quick because they were going to come back and we thought they were going to ask us questions. So after school, we would run from the bus stop to the house to see who got there first to grab the book. And if it was me, I would get the book, start reading it, and I did not stop reading it until it was mealtime. And as soon as I put it back, my sister would grab it and she hurried up to eat so she could continue reading it. And we did that every day. We were so excited about the book.
The sisters loved the missionaries' message and the Book of Mormon, but going to church was a strange prospect. Like many Salvadorians, Silvia and her sister had been raised in the Catholic faith, and she had never attended another church's services.
Silvia and her sister didn't know what was awaiting them at the services for this new religion. And the meeting the missionaries had invited them to happened to be a district conference at which the mission president and other leaders would be present. It was in an unfamiliar area, too. Silvia and her sister had to figure out which buses to take to get there. As Sunday drew closer, they became more and more nervous.
The idea of going to another church, even one whose messages they liked hearing at their home, was scary.
Should we go? It just seemed very scary. Even Saturday night, we still didn't know if we were going to go or not. But then we decided, okay, the worst that could happen would be that they ask us to do something or say something, and we just say, I don't know. And we could leave. So we decided to go. And so we took courage, and on Sunday we went to church. And to our surprise, it was a nice meeting. Everybody sang. We didn't know the songs, but we kind of followed whatever they were doing. And it was just to listen to the speakers. But just overcoming that first time to go to church was a big job.
Silvia and her sister loved the songs that were sung in church, but more importantly, they loved the feeling they had when they came. It was the same feeling they had when the missionaries came to teach them, quiet and warm. An aunt had come with them to church that first week and hadn't felt the spirit. But Silvia and her sister had, and they returned week after week.
At that time, people were typically taught for almost a year before being baptized. In the case of Silvia and her sister, because they weren't adults yet, they would need parental permission to be baptized as well. For Silvia's family, Silvia and her sister listening to the missionaries and even reading the Book of Mormon was one thing, but having them leave the Catholic faith of their family and join another church was quite another.
My dad quickly said, yeah, I'd like that. I'd rather have them be in religion than going out with wild boys. But my mom said, I'm not signing. No one has ever left the Catholic Church in our family. And the whole family were pressuring her. So she didn't sign. And every visit, the missionaries would talk to her. We would talk to her. She would not give permission. until about 3 weeks later. She was not feeling well that day, and she was in bed. And we said, Mom, the missionaries are here and they want to talk to you. They're just going to ask me again for the permission. Go get the permission slip and I'll sign it. So she signed it. So she wouldn't have to see the missionaries when she was sick, and she signed it. And after that, we said, oh, now you have to go to our baptism. Because in the Catholic Church, you all participate in weddings and baptisms, even if you don't care about religion. After our baptism, the missionaries asked us to bear our testimonies. And when I stood up to bear my testimony, all I could see was my mother's face. I didn't see anything else, just my mother's face, because I wanted her to know what I knew and how I felt, that I was feeling something very special and deep. And she must have felt the Spirit, because after the meeting, she asked the missionaries to come back and teach them again. And a few weeks later, they all got baptized, except for my father.
Soon after her baptism, Silvia's mother was called as the Branch Relief Society president, and Silvia later served as a secretary to her. As a teenage new member, Silvia's first calling, however, was teaching primary children, which was the first of many callings she would hold in the church. But a year later, she was given a new calling that intimidated her far more than leading a primary class, teaching the adult Sunday school class. It was there that she really learned how to study doctrine and trust in the Lord.
When I was called to do the adult class, that was different, because I knew I had to be teaching to adults who had been in the church longer than I had, and that they probably knew the doctrine and the scriptures better than I did. And that was really scary. But I knew that the Lord would help me if I put my effort and I studied hard, and I did. But it was always scary that they would ask me questions that I wouldn't know how to answer. I didn't have many resources to do that research, but with the little bit I had, I prepared myself, and I had to rely on the Spirit. I really learned to get on my knees and pray for the Spirit to be present, not only to guide me in my thoughts and my words, but also to open the hearts of those who would be participating so that they would feel the Spirit too, and the Spirit it was given. But it was, again, a learning experience, because I was learning the doctrine at the time I was learning it to teach it.
Silvia also served as a branch missionary with her sister. They knocked on doors and taught lessons, and the skills Silvia learned there helped her when she served as a full-time missionary in Guatemala. There, she met another missionary, Jeff Allred. After returning home, Silvia went to Brigham Young University, where she reconnected with Jeff. The two were soon married and began to have children. Jeff worked for the church, and it took the Young family, which would eventually include 8 children, all over South and Central America. Later, the two served a mission in Spain, and then were called to preside over the Missionary Training Center in the Dominican Republic. From there, Silvia was called as first counselor in the Relief Society General Presidency, so she traveled to more countries still. Silvia's globetrotting gave her a far more global perspective in the church than most.
In the late 1990s, as the family had temporarily settled in Utah for Jeff's work, Silvia was called to the Young Women General Board and asked to help revise the Personal Progress Program and Manual, specifically to help give it a more worldwide focus. She remembered how much she relied on the manuals in her first callings and knew it was important to design a resource that would help others in her position.
I felt a big responsibility. My voice was going to be the international voice for that manual. I had to be sure that everything we put in that manual would apply and make sense to any young woman in the world. One sitting in Nigeria or Kenya, Paraguay, Chile, Guatemala, and the highlands of Peru or Colombia or Bolivia, and in places like the Wasatch Front, and that it wouldn't seem too simple or too complicated. So the responsibility that rested on us, the three members of the committee, was very heavy. But I felt that even more because they depended on me to tell them, would this work in Paraguay? They would turn to me. Would a little 13-year-old in Guatemala and the highlands would be able to do this? So that was a very difficult task. It required a lot of relying on the Lord to guide me and to guide us and to seek the Spirit for inspiration and what to put in that simplified manual.
Although Silvia had learned a lot living in many countries and in her various callings, she wasn't prepared for the global education that would come with her service in the Relief Society General Presidency. She worked with President Julie Beck and Sister Barbara Thompson to determine the needs of the women in the church, no matter where they lived.
While some still think of the church as being a faith concentrated in Utah and the surrounding area in the United States, members living outside of Utah and the US, like Silvia had for most of her life, became the majority in the 1990s. While the core experiences of being a member of the church were the same wherever someone worshipped, there were many differences in culture and local needs. Traveling around on assignment meant Silvia got to meet even more of her sisters in Zion, wherever Zion was, and she learned the strengths and the challenges they had in their respective places.
Some places they're poor, so they're more worried about the everyday living and how do they do it. Unemployment in a lot of places was a big concern, especially in the years of problems. Education was another problem because the youth in a lot of places, they don't have the means to continue their education after they finish high school. And so they felt like they didn't know how to go forward and find employment or be ready to be married because they didn't have anything to bring to the table. So those were concerns in the different areas. In other areas, we have so many young women, but we don't have men. So who are they going to marry?
Silvia would meet with small groups of women to find out the concerns in that area. Whatever the women were worried about, Silvia would amplify their voices with her own and try to get their questions answered or their problems eased. Usually, the concerns would be about how to implement programs or get more support to serve in their wards and branches. But there were sometimes other serious concerns that Silvia heard and tried to get addressed. In one instance, a woman told Silvia that her husband was being physically abusive to her and her children. That revelation prompted others in the group to share their experiences of abuse, and many said they had never dared talk about it before. At another of these meetings, the sisters said they never had enough funds to help the poor and needy, not knowing, Silvia realized, that there was a fund available specifically for that purpose.
We always did reports on our trips, and I always would write these kind of things in the report so that the priesthood leaders and the priesthood department would know what's going on in the field. In the next general priesthood leadership meeting, where they have all the area presidencies and general authorities, the main point that was addressed was precisely the use of fast offerings and how they shouldn't just hold that back from the help that they needed to give. That's what it was for. And then also about the physical abuse, it was addressed in those leadership meetings.
Sometimes, the worries Silvia encountered had to do with misunderstandings about the operations within the church. Especially among newer members, there was sometimes confusion when things changed, like a new personal progress manual or changes in how classes were meant to be taught. People were sometimes challenged or offended at these changes because their understanding of the church was that its truth was immutable and that the truth was unchanging. Some also expected their leaders, both locally and globally, to be as perfect as the gospel's truth.
Everybody tries to follow the first presidency, but a lot of times they don't know how to distinguish between policy and doctrine and principles. So a lot of times they get offended when there are changes in the policies. because they said, well, if it was revelation, why was it changed? And you had to explain that the programs are one thing that will always change according to needs, and that the church was inspired and we should be using flexibility according to the needs, and that's why some changes had to happen. And sometimes they had to reverse a change they had made because it didn't work. They tried it and didn't work, so they had to reverse and go back. And so those were some of the concerns. Sometimes they had in these more sophisticated areas. They also had the impression that you had to be perfect to be to the temple or for anything. And if you were called to be a leader, you could not do anything wrong. You should not do anything wrong. So they didn't see the leaders as humans that would make mistakes or have weaknesses.
As Silvia traveled around the world, she would visit members in their homes, especially when the women and their families were struggling. Silvia found the best medicine was often just to listen and support the women in that way.
In one case, they took me to a sister, young mother, who had first one child and then had triplets. So the oldest was 2, and the triplets had just arrived. They said, we thought that you having being a mother of 8 would know how to help her. I said, well, I had one at a time every year and a half or so. I never got 3 all at once, but we went and just listened to her to know how she was dealing with the situation and how she felt about it. And I was impressed by her answers. One time in Texas, we visited a sister that had just lost her husband because he had gone on the other side in Mexico, and he worked for the government. So he had one of those vans that were government vans, and the cartel people made a mistake, and they killed him. So we were coming on a visit 2 weeks after that had happened. And the stake president said, I think she would benefit with your visit, so we chose her. And I think it is. It did help her, the visit we did. It was a really sweet spirit in the meeting. So those visits were my favorite thing and my calling in the Relief Society General Presidency. The visits to the homes and to meet the members.
Sometimes the sisters would be most curious about her, how she juggled the responsibilities of church callings, caring for her 8 children, community responsibilities, and pursuing her own interests. Every circumstance is different, she would tell them, and share what habits worked for her, like waking up early to exercise or listening to scriptures instead of sitting down to read them when she was short on time. She often urged those who were overwhelmed to reach out and ask for help from family, friends, or fellow members. Perhaps the biggest piece of wisdom she could share, though, was to trust in the Lord in all things, including in the sometimes hectic pace of daily life, and to not get too caught up in unnecessary expectations.
Try to organize her priorities and decide what things she really needed to do. Maybe to learn to say no to some that she doesn't need to crowd into her life because she does not have the time or the effort to do. And to know that the Lord will help her in her decision making and in choosing where to put her best effort. But to always keep in mind that the most sacred relationships we have are with the Lord and with our family. And those have to take priority over everything else. But to also give herself some fun time, things that she likes to do. And sometimes you have to request help from somebody who could give you the help. But of course, when you're young and have your own children and a lot of demands, many times you just have to say, I would love to do this, and if you ask me on a different time, I'll probably be available, but right at this moment, I just can't do it. I have always planned and organized according to priorities, and I always kept in mind that there is a time and a season for all things, and that the Lord would never ask me to do something that it was beyond my reach or beyond my stretch, something that I couldn't handle. So I knew that if I put forth my best effort and studied hard and prepared hard for whatever I was asked to do, he would, like the scriptures say, he would strengthen me, he would help me, and he would uphold me. And he did every single time. Knowing that and planning my days around that helped me find balance and be able to do it and keep doing it.
Today, after decades of selflessly serving others, Silvia looks back on her experiences with gratitude. Serving has always been a matter of habit for her, and something she learned as a child from watching her mother serve relatives or neighbors in distress. Joining the church only gave her more perspective on how crucial that service was to the plan of happiness and more opportunities to help others.
When I became a member of the church, I learned that as a member, I had the responsibility to share the gospel with others and to help those in need. If I really wanted to be a true disciple of Christ, I had to serve like he did. And that helped me always accept callings and be willing to help others. The benefit I got from all that is that I was always happy when I did that I had feelings of satisfaction, and it was rewarding for me to see people change, improve, or feel better because of the help or service that I had given. I learned to rely on the Spirit. I learned to seek the Spirit and to learn to listen to the Spirit promptings. I also learned to be a better listener to everybody. I developed a feeling of love for everyone and to be more inclusive and non-judgmental. No matter what they were doing or how they were doing it, I knew their circumstances were different than mine. Their experiences were different than mine. So my expectations shouldn't be the same ones that I had for myself. I learned that I had to be a better mother, a better wife, a better sister in the church, a better friend. So I learned to listen and to help when I was asked, but to refrain from offering advice that I was not asked to give. The Lord knows us individually. He knows our hearts, He knows our desires, and He knows everything about us, and that He loves us, and that He knew that we could be instruments in His hand to further His work.
That knowledge, that connection, is something powerful and can help us all as we journey through life and the church. Church service is a duty with many blessings attached to it. We become better people on account of giving of our time, talents, and abilities.
I have always felt grateful for that feeling, and that's one of the things that kept me going in everything and serving in the church. At the beginning, I didn't see it as that, but later on I did. This prepared me for this. This call prepared me for that. So it looked like He was taking me step by step in my learning process.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Saints Volume 4. We hope you've come away with some new insights, perspectives, and appreciation for the history of the church. If you'd like to share those thoughts with us, you can email us at saintspodcast@churchofjesuschrist.org. Thanks for listening.